What happens when Shia LaBeouf, the heartthrob of Transformers, steps into the lion's den of Jimmy Kimmel Live to face a comedian whose razor-sharp wit has entertained America for decades? This was no ordinary interview. It was a moment when an artist's soul stood tall against a tidal wave of cynicism, broadcast live to millions. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio glowed with Hollywood glamour, its sleek design a nod to the golden age of talk shows. Neon accents pulsed along the walls, casting a vibrant hue over the glossy black desk where Kimmel held court. Soft lighting bathed the set, evoking memories of David Letterman and Jay Leno's 2000s late-night reigns. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their signs bobbing in the air. "We love Shia," and "Jimmy rules." It was a scene straight out of the early 2000s when talk shows were America's nightly ritual, a comforting escape after a long day. But behind the scenes, tension simmered. Producers huddled in the control room, whispering about Shia's last-minute agreement to appear. "He knows Kimmel might roast his art projects," one said, glancing at a monitor. Shia's publicist had pleaded with the team. "No personal jabs, stick to his movies." But anyone who knew Kimmel's style, his sly grin, his knack for turning interviews into comedic gold, knew that was a tall order. Shia arrived at the studio in a worn leather jacket, his hair tousled, eyes carrying the weight of a man who'd lived 1,000 lives. At 39, he was no longer the boyish Stanley Yelnats from Holes. He was a Hollywood rebel, a man whose roles in Transformers and Honey Boy had earned respect, but whose eccentricities, arrests, viral rants, and avant-garde art made him a tabloid target. Tonight, he was here to promote his latest indie film, a passion project about redemption. But he knew the risks of facing Kimmel, whose humor could cut like a knife. As the house band, Cleto and the Cletones played a jazzy riff, the audience roared. Kimmel strode out, his suit crisp, his smile wide but mischievous. "Welcome to Jimmy Kimmel Live," he boomed, settling into his chair. "We've got a great show tonight, folks. Shia LaBeouf is here." The crowd erupted, a mix of Transformers fans and longtime Kimmel loyalists. Shia walked onto the set, his gait confident but guarded. He waved to the audience, his smile genuine but fleeting. As he sat, he adjusted his jacket, his fingers brushing the microphone clipped to his collar. Kimmel leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with that trademark mischief. The stage was set, but the air crackled with unspoken tension, thicker than the Los Angeles smog outside. Kimmel started with the easy stuff, his tone warm and disarming. "Shia, it's great to have you here," he said, flashing a grin. "You've had quite a journey, from Even Stevens to Fury. How did that tank scene in Fury change your career? I mean, you went from Disney kid to Hollywood badass, right?" The audience chuckled, and Shia relaxed slightly, his shoulders loosening. "Fury was intense," he said, his voice earnest. "Working with David Ayer, living in those tanks, it was like boot camp. It made me realize acting isn't just playing a role. It's about finding truth." Kimmel nodded, but his eyes flicked to the audience, a glint of amusement in them. "Truth, huh?" he said, his tone light but probing. "You're big on truth, Shia. That's what your art's about, right? Speaking truth through, well, let's talk about that later." The audience tittered, sensing the shift. Shia's smile tightened, but he pressed on, steering the conversation back to his new film. "This project's personal," he said. "It's about a guy trying to rebuild his life after hitting rock bottom. I poured my heart into it." Kimmel leaned back, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Rock bottom," he mused. "You've had some wild moments yourself, Shia. I mean, Transformers made you a star, but then you're out there doing performance art. What's that all about?" The question hung in the air, and the audience leaned forward. Shia's jaw twitched, but he kept his composure. "Art's my way of processing life," he said. "It's not about fame. It's about connecting with people, showing them they're not alone." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a half-smile. "Connecting," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Okay, let's get into that." The interview took a sharp turn as Kimmel leaned into his comedic persona, his voice dripping with playful skepticism. Shia, let's talk about those art projects, he said, holding up a photo of Shia at a 2014 premiere, a paper bag over his head scrawled with, "I am not famous anymore." The audience laughed, and Kimmel grinned. This is art? Or is it just a way to keep us all talking about you? The crowd roared, but a few fans clutching "We love Shia" signs fell silent. Shia's eyes narrowed, his fingers gripping the armrest. That was about shedding ego, he said, his voice steady but firm. Fame can trap you. I was saying, I'm more than a celebrity. It was my truth. Kimmel tilted his head, his smile widening. Your truth, he echoed, mock serious. Shia, what do you say to folks who think it's just a PR stunt? I mean, you're sitting in a gallery for number IAMSORRY, letting strangers yell at you. Is that truth or a circus? The audience gasped, then laughed nervously. Shia's face hardened, his gaze locking onto Kimmel's. It's not a circus, he said, his voice low but intense. I sat there to feel people's pain, to let them unload. You wouldn't get it, Jimmy, because you hide behind jokes. The studio went quiet, the weight of Shia's words sinking in. Kimmel's smile faltered for a split second, but he recovered, leaning forward. Ouch, he said, clutching his chest theatrically. Shia, you're coming for me now? I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. Is this art, or are you just keeping your name in the headlines? The crowd murmured, torn between Kimmel's charm and Shia's raw conviction. Shia leaned forward, his eyes burning with the same intensity he brought to Fury. You think it's easy to bare your soul, he said? To let people judge you, mock you? I do it because I believe art can change lives. You laugh at it because it's safer than feeling it. Kimmel's grin turned icy, his fingers pausing on the desk. Change lives, he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Shia, you're out there with a webcam for He Will Not Divide Us, and it's a magnet for trolls. That's changing lives? Or just giving Twitter something to meme? The audience laughed, but it was uneasy now, sensing the line Kimmel was towing. Shia's fists clenched, his knuckles whitening. You don't get it, he said, his voice rising slightly. That project was about unity, about standing together. You reduce it to a punchline because that's all you know, punchlines. Kimmel leaned back, his eyes gleaming with challenge. Shia, what do you say to that? He pressed, his voice smooth but sharp. You call it unity, but the world sees chaos. Art? Or just Shia being Shia? The crowd held its breath, their eyes darting between the two men. Shia's chest rose and fell, his gaze piercing Kimmel like a soldier in battle. You mock what you don't understand, he said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. I'm out there bleeding for my art, and you're sitting here, safe, throwing darts for laughs. The studio felt smaller now, the neon lights dimming under the weight of the confrontation. Kimmel's smile was still there, but it was strained, his fingers tapping the desk as if recalculating his next move. The audience, raised on Transformers and The Man Show, sat frozen, caught in a drama they hadn't expected. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Shia, let's be real, he said. You've had arrests, viral rants, that paper bag. Is this art? Or are you just lost? The question was a dagger, and the audience gasped. Shia's eyes flashed, a storm brewing behind them. He opened his mouth, then stopped, his breath heavy. The silence stretched, every second amplifying the tension. Lost? Shia finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm more found than you'll ever be, Jimmy. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others murmuring in shock. Kimmel's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. He opened his mouth to respond, but Shia cut him off, his voice rising with a quiet power. You think you can sum up my life in a soundbite? My art's for the people who feel, who hurt, who need more than your cheap laughs. Kimmel's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Shia, seriously? He said, his voice tinged with defiance. You're turning this into a therapy session now. The audience laughed, but it was hollow, their loyalty split. Shia stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I came here to talk about my work," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "Not to be your punchline." He reached for his microphone, his fingers trembling. The studio held its breath, waiting for his next move. Would he walk off? Would Kimmel push further? The audience, clutching signs like, "We love Shia" and "Jimmy rules," sat frozen, their breaths held. Kimmel's last jab, "You're turning this into a therapy session now?" still echoed, his smile tight, his fingers gripping the desk. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice sharp, ready to reclaim control. "Shia, let's cut to the chase," he said, his sarcasm slicing through the silence. "You call it art, but your projects." "Am sorry, that paper bag? He will not divide us. They're just a circus to keep you in the headlines, aren't they?" He paused, turning to the audience with a smirk. "Shia, what do you say to that? Truth or stunt?" The crowd gasped, some chuckling nervously, others murmuring in disbelief. It was the final blow, a challenge to Shia's core. The camera zoomed in on Shia's face, his jaw clenched, his eyes glistening with a mix of pain and resolve. For a moment, it seemed he might explode, his fists trembling at his sides. But then he exhaled, his shoulders squaring with a quiet dignity that silenced the room. "Jimmy," Shia said, his voice low but resonant, cutting through the studio like a blade. "I've bared my soul in ways you'll never understand. I've sat in galleries, let strangers scream at me, worn my shame on my face, because art isn't about headlines. It's about feeling, connecting, healing." He paused, his gaze piercing Kimmel. "You hide behind your jokes because you're afraid of that pain. You mock what you can't face." The audience was still, their eyes wide. Kimmel's smirk faltered, his fingers pausing on the desk. "Shia, seriously?" he said, his voice softer now, almost defensive. But Shia wasn't done. "My art's for the people who hurt," Shia continued, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "The ones who watched Holes and felt like outsiders, who saw Honey Boy and cried for their own scars. You call it a circus? I call it my truth." He unclipped his microphone, letting it dangle, and looked Kimmel dead in the eye. "I'm done being your punchline." With that, Shia turned and walked off the stage, his leather jacket catching the light as he moved. The audience erupted, some leaping to their feet, clapping wildly, others whispering in shock. Kimmel sat stunned, his mouth half open, his usual quick wit failing him. The studio's silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the neon lights. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled, their headsets buzzing with panic. "He's gone," one hissed. "What do we do?" The control room was chaos, but on the set, Kimmel forced a laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Well, folks," he said, his voice strained. "That was art, right?" The audience laughed weakly, but their applause for Shia lingered, a testament to the moment's weight. As Shia left the studio, his head held high, the Los Angeles night swallowed him. He didn't look back, his steps steady, his heart heavy but unbowed. Inside, Kimmel wrapped the segment, his charm returning but tinged with unease. "Give it up for Shia LaBeouf, everybody," he said, clapping mechanically. "We'll be right back after this." The cameras cut, and Kimmel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The audience filed out, buzzing with excitement, their voices echoing in the halls. "Did you see Shia's face?" one said. "He owned Kimmel." Another, clutching a "We love Shia" sign, nodded. It was like Transformers, but real. By morning, the internet exploded. Headlines screamed, "Shia LaBeouf destroys Jimmy Kimmel on live TV," and "LaBeouf walks off Kimmel in epic art defense." Clips of the confrontation went viral, racking up millions of views. Fans flooded social media, posting stills of Shia's piercing gaze, quoting his words, "My art's for the people who hurt." For viewers over 55, who'd grown up with the Man Show and cheered for Shia in Holes, the moment was electric. They remembered the 2000s when talk shows were a nightly ritual, when Shia was the scrappy kid in Even Stevens. His stand for sincerity resonated, a reminder of a time when authenticity trumped cynicism. She is right, one commenter wrote. Kimmel's funny, but he crossed a line. Art matters. The fallout was swift. Kimmel addressed the clash on the next show, his tone conciliatory. Look, she is passionate, he said, smiling thinly. Maybe I pushed too hard, but that's showbiz, right? The audience laughed, but the applause was polite, not fervent. Shia, meanwhile, stayed silent, letting his exit speak for itself. His indie film, the one he'd come to promote, saw a surge in interest, with critics praising its raw honesty. Fans revisited Fury and Honey Boy, rediscovering the depth behind Shia's eccentricities. His art projects, once mocked, gained new respect, with number YAMSORRY trending as fans shared stories of how it touched them. The clash became a cultural touchstone, a moment when an artist's soul stood against a comedian's cynicism, and won. It reminded America, especially those who'd lived through the 2000s pop culture highs, that sincerity could still triumph. This wasn't just a talk show spat. It was a lesson. Sincerity and artistic truth can cut through even the sharpest cynicism. Shia LaBeouf, battered by fame and misunderstanding, stood tall, proving that art isn't a stunt. It's a lifeline. For those who watched Transformers in theaters, who laughed at the man show over beers, this moment hit home. It reminded us why we loved Shia's scrappy Stanley Yelnats, why we rooted for his bruised soldier in Fury. It showed that dignity and truth matter, even in a world of sound bites and sarcasm. So, what do you think? Was Shia right to defend his art? Did Kimmel go too far with his jabs? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your take. Did this clash remind you of the 2000s when talk shows ruled and Shia was Hollywood's rising star? Share your memories below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories that dig into the heart of pop culture. Was this a victory for art or just another Hollywood drama? You decide.